Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today and welcome to this pretty special event for us. It's the dedication of the Dr. William Anderson collection. And we're happy to be here today and to celebrate and thank Dr. Anderson for his generosity giving Carl Sandburg College this historical collection. Dr. Anderson was the college's second president. And first and foremost, though, he is a historian, and in his own words, he's a preservationist. He has an extensive historical collection on many areas of interest, but the one he chose to share with us was his personal collection, and it has sentimental value as well as preservation value, such as personal handwritten letters from Helga Sandburg, a commencement address she provided typed on an old typewriter with handwritten notes on it, copies of books signed by Carl himself, and notes written from Margaret. Dr. Anderson has also provided us with a robust collection of written artifacts from the college's history, contained in newspaper clippings, various programs and events that happened. I even have this right here. We have a t-shirt from the one other time in our history the college flooded. Oh. Yes, it's here. For me, it has special value as I was the second president that had a flood here. What Dr. Anderson really has provided to the college is invaluable to the historical preservation of the college and the documentation of our history and that of the Sandburg family and our relationship with them. In just the simplest of terms, Dr. Anderson has provided us with memories. So first, thank you, Bill. We wanted to create a space in the library where people could come and view the items, and for those items that can be out of the case, to be able to sit down and be comfortable. We believe this space captures the essence of what historians like to do, which is to find a quiet, out-of-the-way space where they can get comfortable and dig through those things that bring the past alive for them. And we believe this space accomplishes that. So on behalf of the Board of Trustees, the administration, the faculty, and the staff, I would like to do the unveiling of the plaque. Bill, I know you'd like to say a few words, and so I would like to have you come forward and be able to take a look at the plaque and make your remarks.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, members of the Board of Trustees and faculty and staff for this recognition, and most of all for appreciating the value of what I offered to the college and for preserving it. The remarks I want to make today really provide a context for what drives a college president to be a saver. I said to Lori as we were gathering, some people might say, well, that means that you're a pack rat. Well, as a historian that writes considerably, I'm grateful to all pack rats because they save things that other people throw away. And they tell me, oh, my relative was in the Civil War and he wrote a lot of letters, but we didn't want them, we threw them away. And those stories are repeated over and over again. So that's what my remarks are about. I want to share where this motivation comes from. And when I'm through, if you're not convinced that I'm a preservationist in terms of experience and memories, then I've failed in what I'm communicating. And then I want to conclude by talking about my memories of being at Carl Sandburg College for a decade. So I start out being autobiographical because I was born in Detroit, and Detroit at that time was the 5th largest city in the United States. And when I was 4 years old, my mother and father divorced. And there were three of us. I was the baby in the family, and my brother was 8 years old, and my sister was 11 years old. And in the divorce decree, for some strange reason, my dad got his two sons, and my mother got only my sister, Gloria. And because my dad operated a service station, or in those days we call it a gas station, but it's different than today's gas station, and would work long hours, I'm sure he said, how in the world am I going to raise two small boys with no spouse? So he decided to talk his sister into taking us, and she was a farmer's daughter, and we were sent off to northwestern Michigan in a rural part of the state to be raised by surrogate parents, Uncle Lawrence and Aunt Hetty, and people we didn't know. And in our family, we had a schism. Half of the family supported my dad, and half of the family supported my mother. And my brother quickly decided he was going to side up with my dad, and so he avoided the kind of emotional strain that I dealt with, because I thought I was a peacemaker and I tried to get along with everybody, and it was a tug and pull. And as I got older, I was puzzled by the fact that why did my dad get two of the three children? And I think maybe in kind of a mean kind of way, they said, well, your mother wanted the house, and so she decided to trade her two boys for the house. And ouch, I hope that wasn't true. But anyway, the impact of that early beginning, I believe, was a circumstance that caused me to have a deep yearning and appreciation for family, and has a lot to do with my preserving and saving things. All of us have memories, and we cherish our memories, and some memories are so cherished in our hearts and minds that we never forget them. I believe that great memories of somebody that we loved, like our parents or members of our immediate family, those great memories almost in a sense bring your remembrance of them back to life. Wonderful memories too, I believe, help us get through really tough times, because we remember how fortunate and blessed we were to know and be loved and to love someone. I have a pretty good memory, but I also have had a habit of recording memories. And for some reason, even as a youth, I had a spontaneous interest in almost creating an experience, even though when I was young, I was quite shy. Here's an example. My birth parents did not go to church, but my new mother, my Aunt Hattie, did go to church, and I know that I was kind of taken with the worship service. And having grown up on a dairy farm was a brand new wow experience for me. And my uncle would often stop the tractor and summon me, and as a 4, 5, and 6-year-old, I would stand between his legs, put my hands on the steering wheel, and think I was driving the tractor. And if any of you have any relationship to a dairy farm, one of the tasks that has to happen every day is to haul out the manure. And so when I was young, adults would ask me, like I'm sure some of you in the room have been asked, or you remember, what are you going to be? They called me Billy in those days. What are you going to be, Billy, when you grow up? And honest to goodness, here's what I said. I'm going to preach on Sunday and haul manure the rest of the week. And those that got to know me as an adult said that was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you've been doing it most of your life. When I was 13, my dad was a great Detroit Tiger fan, and I would only see my dad twice a year and my mother once a year, my birth parents. When I was 13, he came to get me and my brother, and we went to a couple of games at Old Brig Stadium. And that particular time, it was a Ford Motor Company great celebration. And the celebration was held at the Detroit racetrack. And I thought I was in heaven because everything was free. I could drink 5 bottles of pop if I wanted to. I could have 4 hot dogs because I didn't have to pay for anything. And the crescendo of the evening was, from the grandstand, they were giving away 10 $100 savings bond in a brand new Ford. And all of us had a ticket, and a naive little farm boy thought, maybe I'll win. They got to the 9th drawing, and the announcer says, the winner is Pat Mullen. Well, I'm a baseball fan, and I know that Pat Mullen is a Detroit Tiger outfielder. And he got up right over there where I'm sitting, and there's another man with him. And I said to my dad and my brother, surely ball players hang out with ball players. That's logic as heck, right? And being kind of shy, but I said, I'm going over and ask him, which was way out of character. And I went over and asked that stranger, and he said, I'm a Detroit Tiger outfielder, and my name is Steve Sochak. And the event was closing, and can you imagine this little guy, 13 years old, this Detroit Tiger put his arm around my shoulder and escorted me out of this crowd, and I got to introduce my dad and my brother to a real live Detroit Tiger player. Memories. Growing up on a farm caused me to be very active in 4-H and the Future Farmers of America. Really important in my life in so many life-shaping ways. We had a herd of grade cows, but my uncle wanted to introduce registered cows into the herd. And so we got our first animal, and when she was before she was 2 years old, she needed to be bred. And at that time in Michigan, and I'm sure in Illinois and all the Midwest, artificial insemination was being introduced. And I studied baseball players and my uncle said, Bill, I want you to take over this whole business of artificial insemination. I'm a high school student, and so I studied all the records of these bulls. And so when the inseminator would come to the farm, I would say, which bulls do you have? And I would make that selection. And finally, I made a selection of a sire named Sir, and the cow, when she freshened, produced 250 pounds more fat than her mother, and I won the first Michigan Artificial Breeders Award. And I got sent to Chicago to the first annual dairy conference and tour. At the same time, the FFA was having its national convention in Kansas City, and a friend of mine hopped the train with no supervision and took the train to Chicago. The Secretary of Agriculture at the federal level was the speaker, but the most important item in terms of what I'm sharing is I learned that the entertainment for us included Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher. And I thought, it'd be interesting if I get to meet those two, which is, what am I doing as a high school student? So I start scouting around. I know when they're supposed to basically arrive, and I see this gathering of people, and they're the press. So I joined the press, and I got a little dinky little camera, and I have in my collection my photograph of those two people posing for me in the press, Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, and I'm not out of high school yet. Then fast forward, after I retired as a college president and I was doing consulting for long-range planning, I learned that then Governor John Engler, who was a Republican, was creating a brand new cabinet post called the Department of History, Arts, and Libraries. And I came home from a speaking engagement when I heard that, and I said to Anna, I want that job. And she said, what? You're retired, are you crazy? If you got the job, would you have to move to Lansing? I said, yeah, I can't drive 2.5 hours every day to go to work. So I applied, and I became the founding director of the Michigan Department of History, Arts, and Libraries. And it opened up a whole new world that was really, really exciting. How many of you ever heard about a woman named Rosa Parks who wouldn't give up her seat? Okay, good. Well, in an auction, Mastro's, which is one of the huge auction companies in our country, got that bus that she rode on, which had been parked out in the field, and I've got pictures of it. It was a wreck, and it was up for sale, and they estimated that it would sell for $50,000. Well, Maybe some of you heard about Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford Museum and so forth. They wanted that bus, and so did the Smithsonian want that bus, and so did the city of Denver. And that bus, the wreck of a bus, sold for $490,000, and the folks in Michigan and Dearborn got it. They completely restored it, and because I was a cabinet member in my position, I got invited to the grand opening, so to speak. And Rosa Parks was there, and the governor was there, and the crescendo of the evening was Rosa Parks was in a wheelchair, and they rolled her up to the door, and we all stood, African Americans and Caucasians, with our hands together, and led by a black quartet singing the anthem of the civil rights, "We Shall Overcome." And I tell you, I drove for a half hour before the chills left me for that experience. Memories. After retiring again, after 21 years as a college president, and going to Lansing in this position, Governor Engler was term limited. And I remember the day when the chief of staff said, if any of you think you're going to be retained because we've elected a Democratic governor, forget it, you're going home. Well, I got a call from the assistant floor leader of the Democratic Party saying, Bill, I don't know what your plans are, but I've written a letter to the new governor saying you ought to keep him. And he said, are you interested? I said, sure, but I thought it was inappropriate for me to knock on the door and say, hey, you don't forget me. And so Governor Jennifer Granholm hired me in that position. And one of the greatest moments of my life, I think, was that the day after she had called and told me that she was going to appoint me to the cabinet and asked me to come to Lansing with the first wave of 5 appointees. And we were in this conference room, and she had her whole staff there, and there were 5 prospective cabinet members sitting around the table, and I knew that I was the only Republican, okay? And if I have to be classified, I would be classified as a moderate Republican. I've never not split my ticket, and I'm really kind of a bipartisan guy. And so each one of us are prepared for the press, so if they ask hostile questions, we know how to handle that. And when that was all finished, the governor turned and looked me right in the eye, and she said, Bill, are you a Republican? And I couldn't help it. I had this grin on my face, and in the worst way I want to say, oh no, I'm a communist. But better judgment, I said, yes I am. And she wheeled around, she said, see, I told you we were going to be bipartisan in this administration. And boy, I was the guy for that. Then I had the privilege when I was in Lansing that the Bicentennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth occurred, and I have a huge interest in Abraham Lincoln's life. And one of the things we tried to do in Michigan was to make sure there would be some legacy to the 200th celebration, not just a big birthday party and blow out the candles and it would be all over. So one of the things we did, and I gave a copy to you, this book, Michigan Remembers Lincoln. And there were lots of things about Michigan's history that related. And the part that I got involved in, as some of you I hope know, that for a while, Carl Sandburg and his family lived in Michigan, in southwest Michigan. They built a brand new cottage, and their property was bordered Lake Michigan. And his wife, he called her Paula, Lillian, had her goat farm there and so forth. And while he was in Michigan, he completed his biography of Lincoln. He wrote the first 2 volumes, The Prairie Years, while he lived in Illinois, and then wrote The War Years, the 4 volumes, when he was in Michigan. So it was a perfect opportunity, and I had read all of Sandburg's letters, and he writes extensively about that process of writing the 4 volumes. So I wrote the chapter in this about Carl Sandburg writing a Pulitzer Prize in Michigan. And as a writer, it was a wonderful, wonderful memory and experience, because it was almost like I was looking over his shoulder while he was writing, because he wrote prolifically to people, and other people were sending him books that, you know, you ought to consider, make sure you have this book if it's not in the library. And you can sense how tired he got by the time he wrote 4 volumes. And, you know, I'm tired when I finish 1 volume, but wow, do 4 really mammoth volumes is really, really tiring. But the highlight of the whole thing was that I got to be in Springfield, Illinois on the 200th birthday of Abraham Lincoln. And we went through all kinds of security, because every state had a liaison person to the National Commission. And finally got through all the security and got into what was the big assembly hall. And I said to one of the waitstaff, I said, "Here's my ticket." I said, "What table am I sitting at?" And she said, "Oh my, your table is right down by the diocese. You're way up front." And so I'm sitting there, and we're waiting and waiting, and pretty soon there's an announcement: the president is in the house, because President Obama was going to be the keynote speaker. And they had a roped off area where he would come up to the stage, and pretty soon there was a gathering of people there. And so I asked people at my table, "Who are those folks?" And they said, "They're the media." Guess what? I became the media. And that night, when he came through, I reached out my hand and I shook hands with President Obama. And think about it, the great emancipator, we're celebrating his 200th birthday in Springfield, Illinois on his birthday, and I'm shaking hands with the first black president of the United States. And I remember, Ann, I called you that night. I was so jacked up. Memories, experiences, things we never, ever forget. I've had a lifelong passion for saving things, and I want to share just a few examples. I talk to many, many men who tell me, "Boy, I had a great collection of baseball cards, but I don't know where they are." Or, "I went off to college and Mom threw them away." Or, "She got so tired of picking them up, she said, that's enough of that business, they're gone." Well, let me tell you, that never happened to me. I saved my baseball cards, and when I was young, I used to get an allowance of $1. And when my aunt would go to town to go shopping, I would go to a store that sold baseball cards, and they were a penny a piece. And let me tell you, it's not as goofy as it sounds for a man to have baseball cards, because I had Mickey Mantle's 1952 rookie card, and guess what? I sold it last year for $15,000. So, not as dumb as I look. Again, as a youngster, I would save up my money, and I would send $1 to Baseball Magazine, which was the greatest magazine ever on baseball in New York. And for $1, you could get 6 paper photos of ball players. They were just paper, they weren't on photographic paper. And I saved those religiously. When I was the president of West Shore Community College in Michigan, I learned that the whole archives of this magazine were going to be sold by Christie's. You ever hear of Christie's auction house, big time, like Sotheby's in New York? 17,000 vintage photos. We were hosting the State Historical Society in our town that weekend, and I was the president of the State Historical Society, so I couldn't go to New York and bid, but they gave me permission to bid on the phone. And that day, I won 300 of those photos. And when they came, I brought along, again, an example. This is the photo I bought when I was a boy. This was one of 6 of my favorite player for 6 photos. And when I opened the package, I got the original that the magazine made the photo of when I was a kid. And I got a whole bunch of these. And I tell you, I was filled with joy, because I was so proud when I was a kid that I had this, and now I've got the original photo. That led me to have a passion for collecting photos. And the first game I ever went to when I was 12, my dad bought me the photo of the team. And this is the photo, okay? And I've been pursuing Detroit Tiger vintage photos the rest of my life. And my dear wife is very understanding of me. And I now have more than 23,000 images of the Detroit Tigers, and I have more than the Baseball Hall of Fame. So, Lori, am I selling the idea why I save things? Because I was a product of a broken home, I think I had closer relationships with my aunt and uncle than you might have in a nuclear family. Not every case, but they were more important than my parents. And when I was a college student, I was a letter writer, and I wrote to my aunt, who was my surrogate mother, and another aunt, and I saved all of their letters. My older brother, like myself, was in the military, and we both served in Germany, and he served first in Berlin, and we corresponded, and I saved all of his letters. When my aunts and uncles got older, it was not uncommon for them to say to me, "We know how much family means to you, Bill, and we know you're a saver. Here's this album and these documents. We know that you will be a good custodian, so we want you to preserve them." And I have most of the family archives. So not many years ago, when our children all gathered for Christmas, I got them together in the living room, and I brought out a box of what I had been entrusted with. And I said, "I've got several boxes that represent our family. I want to know which one of the three of you is going to be the next generation. I don't care who it is. I'm not going to be a part of the discussion, but I expect to get a call from one of you." And our youngest son, Dan, called me in 2 weeks and said, "Dad, I'm going to accept the baton." Anna and I will celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary in October, and I don't take photographs, but when we travel, and we've been blessed to do a lot of travel in the United States and abroad, I buy picture postcards, and I journal on the back of them. I now have 40 years of postcards with journaling and capturing our experiences, and it's really fun. And I can remember one of the time we were going back to Boston. We love that city, and Anna said, "Boy, we stayed in a great hotel. I wish we could stay there again." Just a minute, I'll tell you which one that is. I love that this is in a library because I love libraries. When I was a graduate student, I would skip meals and save the money to buy a book. I majored in history at Central Michigan University and took a heavy load, but when I wanted to rest, I went back to the library, and I would go into the stacks where the history books were and pull books off the shelf. And so I'm blessed now that I have a wonderful personal library, and I've structured that library so I have stacks, and I continue to go into my stacks and pull books off and appreciate. Now let me turn to my cherished memories of serving at Carl Sandburg College for a decade. And so it begs a rhetorical question. Bill Anderson, if it was such a cherished memory, why in the heck did you leave? Okay. Well, when I left in 1983, Norma Cunningham was an associate editor, and she editorialized on my departure. And one of the things that I appreciated that she recognized is that there is a tremendous pull to go home. And to strengthen that pull, let me tell you that the farm I grew up on was in the same township that the college was located in, 4 miles away. My great-grandparents were Danish immigrants, and they lived on the same road the college was, 3 miles away. My Swedish grandfather, immigrant again, lived on the same road about 3 miles from the college campus. I went to one-room schools for 9 years. In the 8th grade, I went to a one-room school that was immediately across from the college campus. The township library was in my grandmother's home for a time. And at that time, my uncle, my surrogate father, had deceased, and my aunt was at home on the farm trying to operate the farm. 6 months after I took the position as president of West Shore Community College, she had her first stroke. And I ended up being a college president and a farmer as I managed the farm for her. And we reversed roles then. I became her guardian instead of she being my guardian. What stands out in my memory bank about the decade that I was here at West Shore Community College? Well, in the 1960s was a momentous time for community colleges, and if you don't know that history, let me share it with you. Illinois legislature and the governor signed a bill in 1965, which was called the Illinois Community College Act, and it created what we call Class 1 community colleges. Before that, there were community colleges. The first one in the United States was at Joliet. The second one, it was at Grand Rapids, Michigan. But those Class 2 junior colleges were associated with a high school. So it was really K-14. And so Joliet, when the school day was over for high school students, the college students used the same building at night for the freshman and sophomore year. Well, it was monumental to say, you know, if we're going to really be accepted into the higher education community, we can't be married to a high school and the same people are teaching the college students. Not that they weren't good teachers in high school, but there's got to be a separation. That you've got to establish a curriculum and start to act like a two-year institution. And when we started, we took a lot of derisive comments, and the worst one was from those who didn't like community colleges that said, well, these community colleges are simply high schools with ashtrays. You can understand what the derisive thought that was being communicated from that. So in Michigan, their Community College Act was in 1966, 1 year after. Well, I was very fortunate because I was hired as a faculty member and a division chair at a brand new community college in Michigan in 1966, the very first year that the Public Community College Act was passed. So I was there the first day that classes were ever taught, okay? And then my mentor was the college president, and after just 2 years, he called me in the office and said, I'm leaving. I said, what? You built this? We have 3 permanent buildings and you built this college and you're leaving? Yeah. He said, I want to take you along as the dean. I said, where would we be going? He said, I'm a finalist for 5 presidencies. And during the 1960s, a community college was being created every week. They were popping up like popcorn. So I went with him, and we went to Southern Illinois, down by Carbondale. Some of you must know where that is, and Marion and so forth. And I was the second employee, and I wrote the first catalog in a motel room. My first desk was a card table. My first chair was borrowed from a funeral home. So from scratch. So what I'm saying is that when I came here in '73, this college was still in its formative years. It was only 7 years old. And the college where I went in Michigan is celebrating their 50th anniversary. The college I was at first celebrated their 50th anniversary last year. So it was a birthing time for community colleges. And there's no excitement about being a part of starting a new institution, because I remember we had everybody at the college in Southern Illinois putting together the furniture. It wasn't just the custodial staff, it was the president and the deans and the faculty and the custodian. Everybody was pitching in to get this college started. So it was exciting for me to come here. Then I had the privilege of being heavily involved in the construction of the first phase of permanent facilities. You all know, I'm sure, that we still have the Butler buildings, which were built as temporary facilities, and they're here 50 years later. When I came here, we also had wooden buildings that looked like barracks, and that was common for community colleges. There wasn't much investment, and you could get them up in a hurry, and they worked as a very infant kind of organization. But with that first phase of construction, boy, did we have some problems with that construction. Here's a couple of examples. At the end of the day, up on the rooftop, when they were finishing cement work, some of the construction workers, when they cleaned out the wheelbarrows that had the cement in them, dumped that down the drain pipes, and that set up. And so we had hard cement in the drain pipes, and they wouldn't drain. And then down below here was the worst of all, because they're big reinforced concrete beams, and the beams sat on pilasters or beams, and we discovered that we were getting leakage through up here because the beam didn't get to the pilaster, and we had to put in steel jacks to hold that up. And we ended up suing the contractor and then hiring a new contractor to come in and remediate. It was serious stuff, and it was costly with court costs and so forth to get that all done. Then, when we were building, inflation was 14%. So every time we went to bid, we exceeded the Illinois Building Authority guidelines, and so we had to rebid. And finally, we said, we can't beat inflation. Honest, we couldn't. So we started just lopping off part of our plan. And I mean, within 2 days, we just took a hacksaw to it and knocked off part of got it done. And that led us then to do phase 2, which is the part over here that includes the gymnasium, the theater, the music and art classrooms. And I got to be a part of that also. Then comes 1974, and this is historic for Illinois, and that was, the legislature said by July of 1974, if there's territory in Illinois that's not in a community college, you decide which college you want to be in. And it had to be contiguous, so it involved Carl Sandburg College, Spoon River College, and Blackhawk, because we were all kind of nestled together. And I want to talk about the first president, Eldis Henson. He was outstanding and exactly the kind of person that this college needed in this situation. The president at Spoon River College, he was going around to these school districts and say, if you join our district, I'll put a branch campus. And go to the next one, I'll build a branch campus there. Eldis Henson didn't promise anything. All he said is, we will do our best to really serve you. And he was the right personality. Eldis Henson was from Kentucky. And when I use the terminology, he was a good old boy, I mean that with great compliment and great appreciation. He had been a school superintendent at Mount Vernon. He had been the president and superintendent of the community college, which became Southeastern Illinois at Harrisburg. That he was the president of one of those class 2 that the community college was associated with the high school. So in talking to the superintendents, he was one of them. He was a peer. He had that, and he just had a way with people that was tremendous. So I mean, Spoon River couldn't compete with Eldis Henson. And so if you think back, we had 10 school districts. This district was founded with 9, and we annexed Avon to give us 10. We added 16 school districts. Who ever heard of the evolution of a community college getting 16 more school districts while it's in midstream? Wow. We tripled the footprint of the college. We doubled our tax base. We added 50,000 people. You know, when I was interviewed for the college in Michigan, they said, Anderson, I don't know, but you know, I want you to know this is a pretty large district. We serve 4 counties. And I tried not to smile because the footprint of Carl Sandburg College was bigger than the country of Luxembourg. And if I drove from the school district in Hamilton to campus, that was 150 miles on a 2-lane road. You want to talk about a big district. And we're supposed to be a commuter campus, okay? So it was a dramatic change, unbelievable change. And the issue and the challenge was, how are you going to serve those people? And again, Eldis Henson was a master because he was able to talk to the people along the river, all those school districts like La Harpe and so forth, and the college, southeastern Iowa at Burlington and Keokuk, and I don't know if it still works that way, but it did in those days. Those people from those school districts enrolled as Carl Sandburg students, went across the river and took all their courses in Iowa and graduated from Carl Sandburg College. I mean, nobody had done anything like that in Illinois and probably anywhere in the United States. So very, very exciting time. Then I want to single out the Carl Sandburg Centenary. Wow, was I lucky to be here then. Being a historian and a writer, to be here for the 100th anniversary of Carl Sandburg's birth. And we had a wonderful partnership with Knox College. Wow, we worked really well together. On January 16th, they issued a stamp for Carl Sandburg, and the post office was in our gymnasium. The deputy postmaster of the United States was here. The artist who drew the stamp was here. All of the Sandburg daughters were here, and so was Burl and Dorothy Ives. Burl Ives was like Carl Sandburg. He was a balladeer. He played a guitar and sang. And he had quite a relationship with Western Illinois University, and Les Malpass was the president then, and Bill Bratton was on our board of trustees, and he was an administrator. So I went through Bill and Les, and I said, can you people give me the contact information for Burl Ives? And I wrote Burl Ives a letter, and Lori, we didn't have much money then either. And I wrote to Burl Ives and I said, we're having this big celebration of Sandburg's birth, and I know that you knew him and you were much alike in terms of entertainment. Would you come and do a concert? We'll pay your expenses, but I don't have any money for an honorarium, which was gutsy. And I was hoping he wouldn't be upset with me. Didn't get a response. So I got the phone number and I called California, and his wife Dorothy answered the phone, and I said, I sent this letter, did you get it? She said, you didn't get our letter? No, we're coming. And I jumped out of my socks. And that night we were able to do a free concert, and we couldn't, the fire marshal didn't show up because we had more than I think should have been in that gymnasium, and people loved it. So then we decided that, well, I should tell you that because Knox had all these activities, I got to be Burl Ives' chaperone. And he's one of the most delightful people you could ever meet. And he took me aside. He said, Bill, I love all people, but I seem to attract older women, and they won't let me go. They just keep talking and talking. He said, now, when I do this with my ring, that says, get me out of here. so I'm his chaperone, and every once in a while he would signal, I need a break. So I'd say, ladies, Burl has really enjoyed your conversation, but I got to get him somewhere else. And then he said to me, I'd like to visit Carl Sandburg's home. So I took him over there, and he enjoyed it. And then I drove him back to the hotel where he was staying on Broad Street. And I said, this is where see those big mansions? I said, that's where they're really wealthy. And here's what he said to me. But they didn't write any poetry, did they, Bill? And I just thought that was classic, that he would make that observation. Then Ann and I were married in '77, and the Sandburg Centenary started in January of '78. So we were newlyweds, and she is a great hostess, and she said, let's invite all of them over for dinner, which was a big deal for us. So we have a long dining room table, and she and I exchange glances. She's sitting at one end, I'm at the other. And at the table is Helga Sandburg, who is married to George Crile, who's a significant physician with the Cleveland Clinic, and his dad founded the Cleveland Clinic. And there's Burl Ives and his wife Dorothy, and there's Janet Sandburg and Margaret Sandburg. And Anna doesn't know, and I don't know, that Dorothy Ives is a vegetarian. And Anna had prepared beef burgundy. And they were so good about it, and we quote this back to each other many times. Burl said, I sure do like these green beans. And we say that we say that to each other. Because we just chuckle about it. We had all these big time shooters in our home, and one of them is a vegetarian, and we have beef, but they like the green beans. Then we brought Burl back for an honorary degree. And he didn't bring his wife, but he brought his stepson with him, and I put him up at the Howard Johnson's downtown Galesburg. And presidents, of course, lead the procession in for commencement. So I drive up. Am I going too long yet?
Kind of.
I got to tell this. I'm
Go
not.
ahead.
I'm gonna stop. And I drive over to pick him up and go up to his room. And Burl is sitting at the desk, and he's got his shirt on and his bow tie on and his jockey shorts and his socks on, and he's working on his speech, okay? and so I sit on the bed with his stepson, and he'll write, and he doesn't like it, and he throws it on the floor. And then he'll say, Bill, what do you think of this? And I'm getting nervous about making commencement. I say, oh, that sounds great. I love it. Oh, I don't like it. Throws it on the floor and so forth. This goes on and on. And wow, we're getting in a real pressure box. So I said, we got to go. So not that he wasn't able, but his son and I, we grabbed his trousers. He took one leg and I took the other, got his breeches on. Each one of us grabbed a shoe and dressed him, and away we go. And then when I introduced him at the podium, he goes to the podium and he talks for about 2 minutes, and he says, you all didn't come here to hear me speak. I bet you came here to hear me sing. And boy, everybody said, and so he grabbed his guitar and did a mini concert. And can't you imagine those graduates that night going home and say, let me tell you what a real commencement is like at a community college. They got Burl Ives and he's singing to us. I'm not listening to some stupid speech or whatever the case may be. And I've always been one that asked people to sign things. So I said to Burl, I said, would you sign the program? And he didn't just write his name, and I gave that to the college. And I love it, and I love what he wrote. I've used it numerous times in commencement addresses because a community college graduation is a family affair. And it's like no other graduation because there are so many, not so many, but there are a number of students that are the first college graduate in their family. And there's a lot of cheering that goes on. And what Burl wrote, and he was so impressed with our ceremony, he said, when those young voices sang out, hooray for mom, better vibes never came from Harvard or Yale. Isn't that beautiful? Wow, that was really, really special. And okay, and then in terms of my remembrances of being here, this treasured relationship with the daughters was special. Just a minute, Anna, I'm going to say what you told me not to say, okay? I told Anna what I was going to say. She said, Bill, that's bragging. I said, I don't care whether it's bragging. Didn't I, Roger? I said, I'm saying it anyway.
We have dinner reservations at 5.
One of the things that, I'm done in just a minute, Lori. You told me I could. I know. And that was that in 1980, we passed an operating millage increase. And we did something that nobody ought to do, and that is to tell the voters, one of the main reasons that we need to pass this is that our employees are underpaid. And we presented that case. Normally, that is the kiss of death, because, you know, teachers only work 9 months and they get paid and all this kind of stuff that goes on. And we passed that millage. And so, as braggy as it sounds, I'm really proud of the fact that happened one time in 50 years, and I got to be here. Then, a neat little connection is that when we expanded the district, we opened an attendance center at Carthage College. When I went back to Michigan, I was appointed on the Board of Trustees of Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It was like I was going full circle from where the college started to where it is today. Lori, board, thank you for accepting this collection. I hope I've made a pretty strong case of why I do this and why I save things and why I think it's important to remember. Thank you.
I would invite everyone to stay. We have inside here, we have punch and cookies. Please, help yourself. Spend some time with Dr. Anderson, although not a long time, but spend some time with Dr. Anderson, and We thank you all for coming, and we appreciate the contribution made by Dr. Anderson, and thank you.